Are you?
34.
Okay, cool. All right, ready to go in 5, 4. All right, welcome back to another edition of the Started Up podcast. I'm thrilled today because I'm going to be talking to a guy whose lifelong journey has been filled with adapting and adjusting and reflecting, and what he has been doing and up to lately has been inspirational to me. It is Andrew Metal. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Don. I'm stoked. I'm glad we connected, and it's funny how we came about that. So I'll get into that when we start.
Yeah, get into it. I mean, one of the things that I've been loving about being transparent in a journey, and this is obviously going to circle right into what you're going to talk about, like when I've been deliberate saying I want to reach out to people that do, and I want them to benefit students. Like,
Right.
and you know, some of the podcast audience aren't teachers and they're not students, but all of them are lifelong learners for sure. And I have noticed this when people do the podcast, when we log off, we're like, they'll give me suggestions. Like, so I had a podcast not too long ago, and he's like, "Oh, do you know Andrew Metal?" I'm like, "No." He's, "Oh my gosh, well, I'm going to change that right now," and so on and so forth. And I just love it because there's this. It seems to be there's this, I dare say, cult of guys and girls that are addicted to doing, and they're just driven. So I'm going to let you take it from there.
Yeah. So I think and I wouldn't necessarily say cult, I'd say close circle of people. And what's really cool is when you can start breaking into those different networks, you realize that the network is a much smaller network than you realized, and everyone seems to know each other. And that network are the people that are operating and performing at a higher level, right? And so you have this kind of niche group of people that are, well known to outside entrepreneurs. And if you can kind of tap and break into that network, your personal network and your business and professional network really seem to grow exponentially. And it's cool because everyone is focused on like full optimization from a business, personal, emotional, physical standpoint, which all relates obviously to education and continuously growing. So yeah, it's really cool once you can kind of break into those networks. And what's really cool about what you're doing is it seems like you've been able to get into those networks with certain people. And like we talked about, it's kind of like the domino effect where you get in with one and then you're introduced to 5, 10, 15 other people, and they're all the people that you want to talk to. So it's a really cool thing.
Yeah, you know what? And I want to pause right there and tell, especially the teachers and parents listening, that there has to be a foundation first. You know, I've met some people, they get so frustrated because they reach out to, and Richard Branson, whatever, and they're like, they didn't get back with me. And I'm like, okay, what value did you provide for them first? And B, like, what are you doing? Like, just some person saying, hey, I want to connect with you, and they can't see what you're doing, there's no incentive. So if you're a parent, I always ask, what are you doing that's remarkable?
Right.
Or are you doing anything to stand out? And that's the whole lecture I keep giving my own students. I'm like, if your life was a book, would anybody read it?
Right. No,
no
one's
going to read a novel of you sweeping through your phone every day. Yeah. You leading an extraordinary life means people are going to take notice. And I think that, like you said, that circle of friends, they become a circle of friends because there's kind of a mutual admiration of, oh, you're working hard too.
Right.
And they recognize that struggle they went all through.
For sure. And actually, like, you brought up a really good point. And this is how I start off every single one of my relationships and friendships, business, personal, whatever it is. But you have to provide value. And the way that I've been able to build my network exponentially is I took my story, my personal story, and we'll get into that, but I leveraged that to get my foot in the door to become a contributor to high-level media outlets like Entrepreneur, Inc., Forbes, and a bunch of others. And so I used that value because I have access to these high-level media outlets. I use that to connect with all these other high performers. And I usually write a piece about them or plug them in some of my articles. I write weekly with all these different outlets. And so immediately when I'm cold emailing or reaching out to someone on Twitter, I'm providing immediate value. And just like the guy Arian that introduced us, he and I are working together. He's providing me value, I'm providing him value, and there's that mutual benefit. And so the relationship stems from that. And every single other person that I've been able to connect with and build my network through, I've started with the process of being a value creator first. And I think if you do that initially, the relationship and foundation of that relationship is set. It's such a precedent that there's no way it can't work, that you guys won't mutually be providing value to each other and helping each other grow. So.
No, that is one of the perspective changes I want them to see, is that, you know, we have a mantra here, and probably by October they'll roll their eyes because they'll hear it so much, but opportunities are everywhere. Like, they just are. And whenever you hear people complaining about things, run to that. Because normally when you run to that, A, somebody is struggling and they need the help, and B, everybody's waiting on a hero, and like, you could be. You know, there is so much right now complaining and going on in the world, and I hate it. I do, because I want to see things get better, but it seems like so many people are focused on just the shouting part. Right. You know, I love Naveen Jain. He keeps telling people, if you want to be a millionaire, help a million people, kind of mantra. And that providing something to the greater whole first will make people go, okay, I'm now taking notice. What are you doing, kid? And then they have that platform. And then, like you said, that then can be leveraged again and again and again, because, you know, when you're doing, now you've got the eyes on you.
Right.
Okay. So let me go back through your story. And I got to admit, this is where I was intrigued, and I'll let you set it up. But you weren't, let's just put it this way, you weren't always successful.
Yeah.
Take it away.
So I have a kind of an interesting journey. When I was young, I was in trouble all the time, from, you know, early teenage years to really about 22 years old. 22, I got in a fight in Las Vegas defending a friend. And mind you, before that, I'd been in and out of institutions and been in a lot of trouble. I started to change my life around after I was sent to county jail for a little over a year. I got out and I was changing my life around, but I got into this one last fight in Vegas. During that time, I realized, you know, the actions that I was doing on a daily basis weren't aligning with the huge vision I have for my life. And so I started just self-reflecting. When I was in jail, you know, I actually read a ton of books, and some of the different books that really allowed me to like focus on who I wanted to be in this world, what I wanted to accomplish, the big visions, my dreams. It just allowed me to really do like a lot of self-reflecting. And so, so I started changing my life around, but not before I got into that last fight, right? So, but I started changing my life around, and ultimately, like I went to college, and I dropped out to pursue startup dreams. I started working with this angel investment team at about 24-ish, and I helped raise, you know, 3.2 million. We invested into this company. I became a partner of that company. It was a sports nutrition company where we're looking at tech and sports nutrition. And we invested into this business. We took over the company. We scaled it. I actually structured the deal with CrossFit. We created a company called Progenics. It's the title sponsor of the CrossFit Games. And we rode the wave of the CrossFit movement at its peak. And I started doing influencer campaigns before that was even a thing. We generated massive revenues. We went from 0 to 8 figures really, really quickly. And I still, you know, continued to build businesses and had side projects on the side. Ultimately, we got into a civil litigation with the original founders that we invested into. And the businesses were just, you know, the civil litigation was ugly. The business was growing, but it just wasn't a healthy environment to be in. So I got out of there, and I took everything I learned, and I went out and I started my own companies. I raised money from investors, and I was around 28 at that time. Unfortunately, from that fight that I got into at 22, I fought the case for about 6 years, and I ended up being sentenced to prison for 2 to 5 years.
Oh.
So at 28 years old, after, 6 years had passed, after, I changed my life around, I was doing a lot of good for the community. I had put together a nonprofit, and I was doing fundraising for the Boys and Girls Club. Because of my past, I couldn't actually be a big brother. So I was doing a lot of things to give back. But in spite of all that, because of the decision I made when I was a young man, I was sentenced to prison. And I went to prison for, I was sentenced to 2 to 5 years, and I lost everything. I tried to keep my companies and emails were sent to me through the postal mail, and I was trying to respond, and it just wasn't working. So I got pushed out of my companies, and I lost everything. I was in prison for 2 years, but there was a moment in time very early on in my sentence when I realized I'm going to be getting out of prison. I'm not doing life here. I'll be getting out sooner than later. And what can I do at this moment in prison to make the best of my time here? What can I do to leverage my time and use prison as my launching pad for my
I love that mindset. Wow.
So I assessed all my resources. I had obviously an ample amount of time. I could get books sent in, and I had the ability to write on notebooks with a number 2 pencil. I knew I wanted to come out stronger emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so I dedicated every waking second while I was in prison to bettering myself. I had books of all types sent in. During those 2 years, I read about 192 books, give or take. I had stuff about physics, about how the universe works, to PHP for dummies and HTML. And so one thing that I wanted to do while I was in prison was teach myself how to computer program, because I had been, in the technology space before that. I knew I wanted to continue with technology. And so I had my friends and family send in a bunch of books related to coding and building websites. And so I wrote my first line of code with my number 2 pencil while I was sitting in a cell. And so during that time, I was so productive. I wrote and read every single day. I even taught myself a new language, which I don't speak anymore. And I was able to read Korean at like a low level, but I just focused on bettering myself at every point and every second of every day while I was there. I was released, and I continued to educate myself. I started my software development company, which I now have. I started with the $200 gate money that I received when I left prison. Now we've been able to work with clients like Microsoft, IBM, the California Education Department. We do software of all types. I continued my education, and I kept building and learning. I then used my story. I pitched it to Entrepreneur. I was then awarded columns on Entrepreneur and Inc. I write for them. I post about 4 articles a week total collectively, and I've been have guest blog posts on Forbes and the Next Web. I've been featured on Time and Inc. of all these other outlets too. And it all really stemmed from being diligent with my time in the worst of circumstances. And
I think that's one of the things that I'm liking so much is that I'm getting a lot of feedback. Did you put your speakers?
Woo. Is that better?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoyed is the mindset you had is that, in some ways, your biggest hindrance became your treasure. And that was the gift of time and being able to focus. And instead of just, bemoaning the fact that I'm stuck here and I'll pout about it. I mean, yeah, you got dealt a bad hand, and that's terrible. But my gosh, looking back, could you imagine things any differently?
Right. No. And because I was able to use the experience in such a positive manner, like it really didn't even hinder my success. It actually catapulted it. And it does depend on perspective and having a positive outlook and being disciplined. I mean, I could have easily played pinochle all day and sat on the yard with everyone else, but instead I decided to sit in my cell and read and write and educate myself. So it comes down to, making the conscious decision of how you want to spend every single day of your life.
Yeah. Better yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what we do now is going to dictate what happens to us in the future. So if you're able and willing to make your sacrifices now, to be disciplined, to realize that the return on investment is not going to be immediate, but if you continue to work hard and stay focused, like all of that energy and everything you're putting into now will pay off down the road. And the return on investment is exponential. A lot of people don't realize that, and they don't do life like that, or they're not willing to make the sacrifices or be disciplined to make that happen. So
that makes sense now that you connected with, Chris Redlitz, and you're working now with the Last Mile, which actually, for the listeners, explain what Last Mile is.
Yeah. So the Last Mile is a nonprofit. We go back into prisons and we teach inmates in prisons how to compute a program. So I got out of prison. I kept building my companies. I kept building my brand. And I reached out to Chris really quickly after I was released, because I knew the power of a positive prison program. I call that my prison MBA. And so I knew the power of a positive prison program, and I knew I wanted to give back. So I looked for organizations that were giving back to the prison population. I found the Last Mile. At that time, they were teaching inmates in prison how to become entrepreneurs. So I got involved right away. I became like a founding member because of my involvement and in my my daily involvement and how much I was providing support. And we started off by teaching how to actually be entrepreneurs. We'd have a demo day at the end of their at the end of the semester. But then about 2 years ago, the program pivoted, and we actually started teaching inmates in prisons how to code through a simulated development environment. And so currently that's what we're focused on. I'm actually building with my team, we're building a learning management system that will allow us to scale the program. Right now we're in San Quentin and 4 other prisons in California, in 21 states with multiple institutions across each state. They want our program because we have a 0% recidivism rate. It's been hugely successful. And we've basically piloted the program in California. Now we're ready to scale elsewhere. So
that's awesome. Yeah, taking a negative and turning it into positive, and then you're helping others. So I just looking over that when I got in contact with Aaron and looking over your story, that's probably the reason I wanted you on. I mean, you have completely refocused. Rebranded in a sense, and you were already on a path to success before you got put to jail. But when you're like, okay, I'm here, you more than made the most of it. You magnified your time and your focus, and it turned out wonderful. And now your focus is also on giving back. Matter of fact, transitioning, it seems now that you enjoy putting a spotlight on other people. Tell me a little bit about some of the channel stuff you got, like Action and Ambition and Backstory and things like that.
Yeah, so I have these entrepreneur video shows that I just started launching. Action and
Entrepreneur video shows, actually, aren't they sponsored by Entrepreneur Magazine?
Yeah, they're actually syndicated and put up on entrepreneur.com. So we're in the initial filming phase where I'm connecting with a bunch of different people, and I interview them just like a normal video show, but we highlight some of their different struggles and talk about how different things they've overcome. I have Pat. He's the founder of RVCA, RVCA. It's a surfing and clothing company. So we're interviewing him. I'm going to be interviewing Gerard, which is a mutual acquaintance of ours. Interviewed my friends. They created these sunglasses called William Painter. Amazing guys, really cool product. And so it's a cool interview format. I also have another show called Background Check, where we are going to be interviewing different people on a private jet, just kind of a different format and kind of a fun format. And then I actually have a new podcast I just launched with a friend of mine. Her name's Brittany Hoffman. She actually used to be a part of Gary Vee's branding team, and it's called Co-Branded. and we do everything and talk about everything related to branding. We do branding teardowns. We look at other companies, and just offer some advice as to how they can improve, or talk to guests, and just all things branding, which is really cool.
It's awesome.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Repeat that again.
She and I just have some varying and interesting personal perspectives. So that's cool combo.
All right. So with all these things you're starting to see, you're meeting a lot of doers. You're meeting a lot of people that just are, success is something they have to do. If you're talking directly now to let's just say a 14 to 18-year-old, right? You're looking at them and saying, look, I've started to realize the DNA of some of these people. The first thing they should start with is what?
Figuring out what they have, like what their vision is. I think a lot of young people are unfortunately hindered by dogma, and they do what they think society wants them to do, or what their parents want them to do, or their peers, or their teachers, or whoever it is. I think like the first step is to owning up to what the big vision you have for your life is. And if that seems like too big to grasp, good, because I think that's important. So I think really understanding, like when I was younger, I had this huge vision for my life, and I was just not making the decisions that would help with that. But even in the midst of all my trouble, I was still starting businesses. And I started my first business when I was in high school. It was a mobile detailing business. I was selling drugs. I took my drug money, I put it into a mobile detailing business, because I knew the drug thing wasn't like what I wanted to do. It was just a means to an end. And so I was still trying to be an entrepreneur. I just wasn't, just the decisions to get there weren't right. And I think though, like people sometimes like dwarf down their visions because they don't want to like offend other people, or they're too afraid to tell people what like they really want. Do you want to be an actor on Hollywood? Look at Logan Paul and the way he's generated his following. You want to be a businessman like Gary Vee? Look at the steps he's done. Look at like the big vision he has. He wants to buy the New York Jets. Like I think a lot of people dwarf their vision because they're afraid of what other people will think.
Yeah, but within that, I've also, and even Gary kind of complains about it, then Gary feels like then he has a lot of mini Garys that all of a sudden, there's, almost trying to live Gary's path. And he'd be the first one to admit that. So you do have like this cult of personality, because in some ways he's like, yes, follow my example of working really hard, but to using his words, don't just constantly tweet, I'm an entrepreneur and I hustle, and then not really do those things. Like people love the mission. People just don't necessarily like the journey, because the journey is tough. Right. And I think it's one thing I like to key in on what you've done is like you had a benefit by being isolated, because when we're distracted, we have such luxuries here, so if you're a middle class person, especially, you can be distracted by your favorite sports team, your drink of choice, your whatever. But the people that I've talked to that are really successful, they've usually struggled mightily in certain aspects of their life, and in that struggle became their pot of gold.
Yeah. Agree. I think, prison had its benefits if I could find them, which I did. And I translate them now to my everyday life. Like prison doesn't have the internet and distractions. Me personally, in my everyday life, I don't watch TV. I don't drink. I don't do a lot of things that other people do, because I know the benefit of not being distracted by all those things. And to my previous point, I totally agree with you. I think that there is an issue with people trying to be like other people. I think if you can look at them and see their roadmap to how they achieve that success and live your own life. That was my point, is to just understand what your big vision is and live it out. So I think that's critical for a young person to kind of figure out what it is that they do want. That's sometimes as an older person, you're still trying to figure it out,
Yeah, and it is, but it's that trial and error and that fear of failure to take away. You know,
Mhm.
the person that's not afraid to make a fool of themselves a little bit and try something. And then what I always hit on, the reflecting is to me the most important. So you've done some stupid things and it didn't work. Okay, did you reflect on it and did you adjust? Because if you just keep trying things that fail and you just keep doing the same thing and failing, well, now you're just a failure. But if you try things and you fail and you keep documenting what you didn't do correctly to work towards it being better, then that's something different altogether.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And this goes back to like we were talking about, um, documenting your journey along the way, because that makes for really interesting content too. But yeah, I think when I was younger, I didn't realize the power of failure. And so I would start businesses or work on projects or have ideas, and I would do them and then they wouldn't work out. And then I would think to myself, oh man, like I keep failing. I don't understand. But all that was me testing. And testing and failing can be kind of the same thing, which is okay. I mean, failure isn't failure. It's only failure if you don't learn from it, which is kind of cliche to say, but it's true. But failure, it just means that the intended result didn't actually happen. So if you look at business like a science experiment, you test different things. Maybe you have an idea and you expect this to happen, but you expect X to happen, but Y happens. So you didn't fail, you just learned, and you can continue with that, or you can test something else. And I think if you look at business and life as like an experiment, I think that you can have a much different and better perspective than other people.
Yeah, yeah, because you did it. And
Yeah.
I think as you're starting to connect with some of these people, I think that's been the fun part of you reporting back, what they do. That's one reason why I'm like you. I don't watch TV, but I'll sure as heck watch a documentary or read a book
Right.
of them pouring out their 3 years of learning and then having shortcuts. Like, here's all the things I did wrong. I'm like, okay, thank you.
Right.
I'm gonna take what you've done right and see if I can use those techniques or that mindset to help empower me, or better yet, help pass that on to my students because I really want to see them successful.
Absolutely. Can I ask you a question? So do your students, are you helping them, like, do they have business ideas, and are they actually like testing their business ideas, or are they not at that point yet? Or what does that look like?
Oh man, I'm so glad you asked this. Because I don't want to do like shameless self promotion, but because you asked, yes. Hold on. Oh, uh, but because you asked, yes. So my students, so I'm borrowing this from Tina Seelig. She's at Stanford. She's a true inspiration. But she's like, there's 4 quadrants. There's imagination, there's creativity, there's innovation, and there's entrepreneurship. And everybody's imaginative, right? The people that actually do something are now creative. But even being creative, you have to level up. So the person that watches TV and says, "Well, I thought of Uber before anybody else did." Mm-hmm. Sure, he did. What did you do about it?
Right.
And it's that level of engagement and doing something. So if all of a sudden I can get my students to be creative, that's awesome. Now we start looking for opportunities to be truly unique and helpful. So that's when that's why it's called innovation open source learning. The innovation comes usually within the first part of the school year, but the open source learning comes from people like you. It's my job to connect them with people that are smarter than me, better than me, all that good stuff. So I have them reach out to those people, usually on social media, and say, "Hey, can I learn from you? Or could you help look this over? Or would you magnify what I'm doing?" Sorry. This isn't very, like, normally I do a podcast from home for this reason, but I want to squeeze this one in today. So if they start becoming innovative, then, like I said, they reach out to these people. And a lot of times, if they think they've got something good, they should be entrepreneurial. They don't have to, but they should. And so, yeah, we've launched some businesses. We've had some patents awarded to some of the students in the class. And by the way, we got the patents because patents are expensive, but we looked for sponsors. We wanted to partner up with law firms and things of that nature. So the more entrepreneurial they can be, I'm happy. It's not a requirement, but it happens. But I think the number one thing we definitely get at is like, no one's going to care what you do unless you bring value first.
Right.
So, we worry a lot about mindset. We learn about the connectivity, all these things. And honestly, this is one of I love doing these podcasts because like whether you like it or not, you're now a contact for my students. So, like some kids gonna be worried about branding. I'm like, oh no, it's okay. I got you.
Well,
and I pass
question stemmed from something else I'm actually working on. I haven't released it yet, but I'll tell you now because why not? We'll release. I'm launching in probably the next week or so. But obviously because I've been successful and I've gone through hardships and I've overcome and continued to be successful, people gravitate towards me. Plus the fact that I'm constantly spreading my message and gospel on all these high-level media outlets, I get a lot of exposure. And so when I first started sharing my story, I'd have thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs email me constantly and find my number and text me. And so what I did was I created a Facebook group where I mentor and provide value to, like we have 16,000 plus entrepreneurs from all over the world. So it's an international entrepreneur group. And I realized there's something that I consider the investment chasm, which is people have these ideas. Previously, you used to be able to get funded on an idea, like even up to about 2011. But since the lean startup came and investment philosophies have changed, we have this investment chasm. And the investment chasm is the area between validation and product market fit. And so what I'm starting to do now is I've created this angel resource fund where I'll invest my resources, whether it's development or graphic design or marketing or legal and documentation, whatever it is. Like I put together these packages of investments where it's not monetary, it's the actual resources themselves. And I'm going to start investing into entrepreneurs to help them get from idea to validation over to product market fit, where they could then continue to build their company and potentially attract future rounds of funding from sophisticated investors or even friends and family at that point. But at least then they'll be positioned, they'll mitigate their risk, and they'll be able to scale whatever their business or idea is. So I'm in the process of launching that resource fund, and your students are more than welcome to join my Facebook group where they can interact and connect with, thousands and thousands of other entrepreneurs from all over the world. So,
and the name of that group is?
I'll send it to you. It's Entrepreneur Ammo, AMMO, but I'll send you the link.
Okay, very good. No, I love this. I like the fact that you're willing to mentor back. Having gone through what you've gone through, you had a mindset of growth instead of fixed, and I sincerely appreciate that. But also the fact that you're spotlighting other people and the up and comers as well. And I think that's so important that you're modeling that. It's not one of those things that, okay, now that I've made it, I'm only going to do what I want to do, that you're still in the business of supporting and mentoring. And I think that speaks volumes about what you do. Yeah. Okay. But before I leave, tell everybody all the things, like where they can find you, your website, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Go to andrewmetal.com for pretty much everything. And then I spend most of my time on Instagram. So that's at Andrew Metal. That's MEDAL. All my shows, my podcasts, everything can be found directly from my website, newsletter, all that good stuff. So,
hold on a second. Jesus, this is why I don't do podcasts on this day. Okay, I'm gonna edit that part out. Okay, but yeah. All right, 3, 2. All right, man. I sincerely appreciate that. I'm sure you're going to be hearing back from some of my students, especially on this the Facebook thing. And then for that matter, I'm going to make this public anyway. So you'll probably be hearing back from people more than just my students that want to be a part of the Facebook group. But again, the resources you're providing, all the things you're doing for everybody else, sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I really appreciate you having me on. And, let's stay in touch. Maybe there's a reason for me to come out there at some point, or who knows what else can happen from this. So I'm definitely open. I do believe in giving back any way I can. So I'll do that, and I'll be a resource however you guys need me.
All right, Andrew Metal, there it was. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks, Don.